The first morning on the Chattooga, the film crew shoved off in a flotilla of rafts and canoes. Just 2 bends downstream, disaster struck again. The raft carrying the film's sound equipment hit a submerged rock at the perfect angle to tear a gash in the hull. Professional recording gear worth thousands of dollars disappeared into the dark water. Microphones, mixing boards, everything they needed to capture dialogue. By evening, the production had limped barely a mile downstream. A shattered canoe, sunken sound equipment, everyone soaked, rattled, and beginning to understand what they were up against. Around a small fire that night in Clayton, Georgia, director John Borman tried to regroup his shaking cast. The accidents felt like omens. The Chattooga wasn't just a backdrop. It was alive, testing them, and no one knew what it would demand next. That chaotic first day on the river was just a taste of what was to come. Hey, I'm Robert, and welcome back to The Outfall for the conclusion of our Chattooga series. When we left off, several currents of history were converging. The Grumman canoes were opening up wild rivers. You had the wild scenic act, which offered up a glimmer of hope, and James Dickey crafted a story that would echo far beyond its pages. So what happens next? Today, we're going on set for the making of the movie, a shoot so intense that after Burt Reynolds insisted on doing his own waterfall stunt, the director dryly told him it looked like, I quote, like a dummy going over a waterfall. We'll also meet the future president who took on the river's rapids, and we'll find out exactly how, against all odds, the Chattooga was saved. Ready? Let's get back into it. So, the book had barely hit shelves in 1970 when Hollywood came calling. Warner Brothers got their first look at Deliverance through an unexpected connection. David Giler, a former student of Dickey's, who was working at the studio. He knew what he was reading wasn't just another adventure story. Giler later recalled being struck by how the novel captured something quintessentially American, this struggle between our longing for wilderness and our fear of it. He sensed it could become that rare thing, a commercial film with artistic gravity. Dickey, who had never written a screenplay, insisted on taking the first crack at adapting his work. But it was the choice of the director that would prove crucial. British director John Borman signed on in the fall of 1970, though not without reservation. When director John Borman first read Dickey's manuscript, he knew immediately he had something special. But their first meeting would reveal just how complicated adapting Deliverance would become. Borman later recalled how Dickey pulled him aside and made a startling confession.
When I first went to meet Dickey, he told me that he took me on one side and said, I'm going to tell you something I've never told a living soul. Everything in that book happened to me. Well, I was so shocked, Of course, I couldn't wait to tell someone. And I told my production manager, and he said, yes, he told me the same thing. Now, when I got into a canoe with James Dickey and he capsized it, I realized that absolutely nothing in this book had happened to him.
In late October, Dickey led Borman and his producer on a scouting expedition. They considered the Nantahala in North Carolina, but found it too tame. The Chattooga, though, that was different. During their test run down the supposedly easier Section 3, the river gave them a taste of its power. According to a river guide, when they first saw Chattooga's relentless power, Borman turned ashen-faced and whispered, "My God, this is it. This is exactly what the book feels like." When it came to casting, Borman made an unexpected choice. Despite interest from heavyweights like Marlon Brando, Jack Nicholson, he gambled on a young Burt Reynolds, a TV actor with leading man looks and a Southern pedigree, willing to work for $50,000 and a chance for stardom. John Voight, Ned Beatty, Ronnie Cox rounded out the quartet who would bring Dickey's Dark River journey to life. For those who haven't seen it, the film follows 4 Atlanta businessmen whose final canoe trip down a river slated to be dammed turns into a brutal fight for survival. After a violent encounter with locals, they must escape not the raging water, but the people hunting them. In May 1971, the cast and crew gathered at the Kingwood Inn near Clayton, Georgia, just 20 minutes from the river. None of them could have known that the next 3 months would test them almost as much as their fictional counterparts. The challenges revealed themselves immediately. Rutted logging roads that seemed to lead to nowhere, crushing Georgia summer heat that turned equipment into hot metal torture devices, and actors who'd soon learn that the Chattooga demanded respect. Their first lesson came on a quiet pond at the Kingwood Golf Course, as far from whitewater as you could get. Both canoes tipped over in the calm water and reality sank in along with the actors. If they couldn't stay upright in a golf course pond, what would happen when they faced actual rapids? Unlike most films, Deliverance would be shot sequentially following the story's journey downriver. It began with what would become one of cinema's most memorable scenes, the dueling banjos. That 6-minute sequence consumed an entire week, requiring nearly 70 different camera setups to capture every angle, every reaction. Billy Redden, discovered in a local elementary school, sat coated in white makeup, pretending to play while another musician's arms reached around him to finger the guitar. Then the real adventure began. Getting to each day's filming location meant navigating these logging roads in thick Georgia summer heat. The crew stripped down to the essentials, often just 4 people squeezed into camera rafts, the cameraman, 2 technicians, and Borman directing. Ronnie Cox, who played Drew, recalled this pristine isolation. We'd put in and go down river. They wanted the lenses to be down as close to the water as possible to give the shots more drama. So once they were set up, we would come and canoe past them. Some days we didn't end with cut. It was the lack of access points meant paddling another 10 miles just to get off the river. As the filming progressed deeper into the wilderness, the line between fiction and reality began to blur. The Chattooga wasn't just providing a backdrop. It was becoming a character in its own right, one that would capture America's imagination in ways that would reshape its future. The canoe crash that sends Burt Reynolds hurling down the falls posed the most danger in the film. It was shot in the nearby Tallulah Gorge, with the crew rigging a pre-broken canoe with a cable release system. The instant Reynolds' canoe hits the Old Town canvas wood canoe, Borman released the cable so that the Old Town split apart. Borman was leery of having his lead actor doing the waterfall stunt himself.
And it was about 85 feet down, and they sent a dummy over. And Borman looked at it, John Borman, the director, and rightly so said, "It looks like a dummy." And I said to Borman, "I can do that." And so they stopped the water, and I said, "Give me a spike," a mountain climbing spike. I went out in the middle of the river and drove the spike in. I put a rope around it, and I said, "Now when the water comes, it'll come around me, you see, and I'll put my hand up and wave, and that's when I'm going to let go, so you can roll the cameras, and then I'll go down there, I'll hit that rock, and then I'll spin off to the left, and then I'll do a flip, and then I'll land down there." And they all went, right, we had about 4 cameras, and I heard them letting the water go. And I looked back, and coming at me was this tidal wave. And away I went. And I didn't go anywhere I told them I was going. I went wherever the water wanted me to go. But the first rock I hit, my tailbone cracked. Then I did turn a flip, which was what I said I would do, but I didn't do it on purpose. Then I landed in what they call a hydrofoil. Well, the hydrofoil, you can't swim out of it. You have to swim to the bottom, and then it kind of spits you out. And I had been told that, and I had remembered it, thank God. And I went to the bottom, What they don't tell you is that it spits you out like shooting a torpedo out of a submarine, about 70 miles an hour. And I went over the falls, a 30-some-year-old guy in the best shape of anybody, and came up 150 yards down the river, totally nude, and about 78 years of age, could hardly walk, and had hit every rock, along the way, going 70 miles an hour, it seemed. And they all thought I had drowned.
When Reynolds asked how the stunt looked to the film crew, Borman supposedly responded, quote, like a dummy going over a waterfall. Years later, Ronnie Cox shared another harrowing story from the filming at the Gorge, highlighting the raw physicality of the production. After being thrown from his canoe, he found himself in a life-threatening situation. I was being swept downstream at an incredible speed with big falls looming just ahead, and I had no life jacket, he recounted. The production team had set up 2 safety ropes across the water. The plan was for me to grab the first rope while swimming through that section, preventing me from getting carried towards the falls. A second safety rope was positioned 40 yards downstream as a backup. When I spotted the first rope above me, I reached up and grabbed it, but the water pressure was overwhelming. It ripped me away, and suddenly I was hurling toward the last rope. The stakes were absolute. If I missed it, I would go over those falls, 150 to 200 foot drop. By this point, the cameras had stopped rolling. No one was filming anymore. Everyone was focused on getting me out alive. I managed to grab the second rope, but again, the current was too powerful. It swept me off immediately. I was now down to just 40 feet from going over the falls. That's when Jerry, one of our assistant prop men, saved my life. He had prepared for trouble by tying a rope around his waist. When he saw me lose grip on that second rope, he jumped in, reached me, and the crew pulled us back to safety. Without his quick thinking and bravery, I wouldn't be here to tell the story. James Dickey was left in awe with what the actors were willing to endure for his story.
All I can say about those actors, Burt Reynolds and John Voight and Ned Beatty and Ronnie Cox, is that every one of them has got more guts than a burglar. They'll try anything. And they's been beat up and banged around on those rocks. These guys really believe in this, and they're so deep into the parts that they'll take on anything. Any part of the river, any records, or Woodall Show, Sock and Dog, any of those places.
By August 1971, filming was complete, and Borman retreated to Ireland to shape his footage into what would become a landmark of American cinema. When Deliverance hit theaters in 1972, it struck like lightning. The $2 million gamble paid off, grossing $46 million and earning 3 Academy Award nominations. But the film's impact reached far beyond box office numbers and critical acclaim. Rivers across the country suddenly found themselves hosting waves of adventurers, many woefully unprepared, all seeking their own wild river experience. The Chattooga, now famous as the film's unnamed river, faced a flood of would-be Lewis Medlocks. In aluminum canoes and kayaks, an estimated 15,000 people had run the river that year alone. Meanwhile, away from the Hollywood spotlight, a different kind of drama was unfolding. In 1969, Congress had tasked the Forest Service with studying the Chattooga's eligibility for wild and scenic status. Their conclusion was unequivocal. This was, quote, one of the longest and largest free-flowing mountain streams in the Southeast remaining in a relatively undeveloped condition. Its beauty, they declared, was unsurpassed in the southeastern United States. The timing couldn't have been more critical, as Deliverance brought the Chattooga international fame and also brought something unexpected, a constituency of people who are now saw the river as something more valuable than just a power source. Following the study and overwhelming public support, the task force proposed designating the Chattooga as a wild and scenic river. Let me stop right here for a moment. That phrase, quote, overwhelming public support, deserves some context. The Forest Service held public hearings at the Rabun County Courthouse. 200 people showed up. Out of 30 citizens from the 3 states who made oral statements, only 2 expressed any opposition. Now just think about that. 2 out of 30. Can you imagine that level of consensus today on anything? Yeah, me neither. Anyway, the proposal wasn't just paperwork and politics. It was personal. The local paddling community made it their mission to get politicians on the water to let them experience firsthand what was at stake. One of those politicians was the governor of Georgia, Jimmy Carter. Bull Sluice was, and still is, one of the Chattooga's most infamous rapids on Section 3. A fierce double drop where the river squeezes between house-sized boulders before plunging over a diagonal ledge into a churning hydraulic. It's where countless paddlers have earned their baptism in the School of Hard Knocks and where many still portage their boats along the shore. Most of Carter's group had already carried their canoes around the rapid. Doug Woodward, part of that group that day, remembers the moment clearly. The governor turned to Woodward and asked, "Doug, what do you think the risk is?" Woodward hesitated. Kayakers run Bull Sluice all the time, but he couldn't recall ever seeing a tandem open canoe make it through successfully. You probably got a 1 in 100 chance of making it, Woodward finally replied. Carter corrected him. No, that's not what I meant. What's the risk of our being killed or badly hurt? Oh, very small, he told him. Carter had stacked the odds in favor. Claude Terry, one of the most skilled Chattooga paddlers at the time, would be guiding from the back. And unlike some politicians who used rivers as just kind of photo ops, Carter had put in hours of practicing before ever dipping his paddle in the Chattooga. Woodward grabbed his camera and went to check on the safety crew. And as he walked away, he heard Carter's optimistic, "Let's do it," and probably thought to himself, "They're going to take a swim." All eyes fixed on the entrance drop, framed by a dark granite, rhododendron on the side. But the real test was seconds away. Woodward raised his camera as Terry and Carter strained to position for the diagonal ledge. Teeth clenched. Terry put everything into that last second draw stroke, just enough. Maybe, or maybe not. In that instant, with the canoe half on, half off the ledge, Claude crossed over for a saving brace on the right side and then skirted down the rapids. Many years later, this is what Doug Woodward said about the event.
I've got the only photo I had of that run because there was only one frame left in my camera, and I tried to use them all up farther upriver, thinking, nobody's going to be running Bull Sluice. But the one frame that I do have shows a moment of hesitation as Carter's hanging out in midair on the ledge.
You can see this exact moment, now a famous photograph, in the show notes. As Carter and Terry navigated the churning waters of Bull Sluice, another kind of navigation was happening in Washington. The Chattooga's fate would ultimately be decided in the halls of Congress, where something remarkable happened. Unanimous support. In 1974, Roy Taylor of North Carolina stood before the House Representatives with a bill he co-sponsored with colleagues from South Carolina and Georgia. His pride was evident as he described a river that begins on the crest of the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina and flows through some spectacular and primitive mountain country. But it was his next revelation that captured the unprecedented moment. For once, everyone agreed. The Department of Agriculture and Interior endorsed it. All 3 state legislatures supported it. The public meetings were overwhelmingly positive. As Taylor put it, quote, "I know of no significant opposition. On the contrary, it enjoys enthusiastic support from almost all quarters." On May 10th, 1974, President Nixon signed the bill and the Chattooga became America's 29th wild and scenic river. Over 50 miles of wild water from the base of the Whiteside Mountain to the slack waters of Lake Tougaloo would remain forever free. That same week, Nixon was fighting for his political life amid Watergate. He helped ensure that one wild river would keep flowing as nature intended. The dams that might have been, the reservoirs that were just blueprints, all those carefully engineered dreams of power, they dissolved like a morning mist. The Chattooga had survived through an unlikely confluence of events. A wartime aluminum innovation that launched a paddling revolution, a poet's dark tale that became a film classic, a governor who ran Bull Sluice, and finally a moment of rare political unity. The river that had carved its way through ancient rock had now carved its way into American history, protected not for the power it might generate, but for the wildness it already possessed. You know, the river that flows today is still wild, still challenging, still drawing people to test themselves against the rapids. In the show notes, you'll find behind-the-scenes photographs from the making of Deliverance, that famous shot of Jimmy Carter at Bull Sluice, and more. But before we go, maybe it's worth hearing from the man whose imagination started it all. For James Dickey, the Chattooga it wasn't a setting, it was a living presence that haunted him to the end. And when he talked about where he wanted to rest, it sounded less like a request and more like poetry. And maybe that's how it should have ended. For the man who gave the river its story, the river would give him his deliverance.
I don't want to be buried in a coffin. I don't know whether the state of Georgia or the state of South Carolina would stand still for this. But because we made a movie up on the river, the Chattooga River, what I would ideally like is to be dumped into the ground on the west bank of the Chattooga River, right by the wildest of the rapids, which is a place called Woodall Shoals, and covered up for somebody to play doing banjos over my grave, and to have a very simple stone erected, or maybe a wood carved thing that said, James Dickey, 1923, 1975, 6, or whatever it would be, American poet and novelist, here seeks his deliverance.